Say yellow to YOLO with the YOLO S7 camera. It is a very unique webcam in the sense that it is a webcam designed for streaming and content creation that has a removable lens. That's so exciting. What do we get in the box? We get that sleeve so you can bring that camera around. We get quite a beefy Type A to Type C, which is our data cable, and it's quite long. That looks to be about 10 feet. That's pretty nice. You could bring this camera as far as 10 feet from your computer. That's incredible. Okay, that's a little facetious. It is meant to be a webcam, so 10 feet is actually plenty long. In this box, we have a C to C power cable. Looks to be about the same beefiness and length, maybe a little bit shorter. But both of these connectors actually have a little screwing bit so that it locks, so that even when you move the camera, you're not in super large danger of just yoinking out a cable in the middle of a live stream, which would be catastrophic. We have our quick start guide and our product manual, and that's it. YOLO also sent us a power adapter, although you could presumably use a different USB PD one. What am I looking at? Oh. That's a really long brick. If it's on a surge protector that's on the ground, not a big deal. But if you're plugging it into a wall, that is a lot of weight on something that has very little resistance. This little doohickey is good for up to 45 watts at 20 volts, but that wouldn't be necessary. The camera itself uses 12 watts of power, and so this should be plenty, but you also have a lot of versatility in the kind of power bricks you could be using. Inside this one, we have, oh nice, a little L bracket with '20 slots, as well as a slot that we could put another '20 to mount our camera in its vertical orientation. This is predominantly for short form content creation, presumably, although that makes less sense to me than it being a streaming camera. I have a lot of questions about this thing that I hope I will be able to answer. The last thing inside this box is our '20 tripod little screw. The L bracket itself is actually a pretty good quality. This is pretty on par with something I would expect from like a small rig or something. And the fact that you have the 3 mounting holes on the back is actually a pretty nice quality of life thing. Thankfully, we got some pretty good versatility. We have a microphone jack, we have an HDMI out, and then we have 2 Type Cs. One is for power and one is for data. And that's because you can actually stream using the HDMI out and the Type C. The Type C will be limited to 1080p, but if you're Twitch streaming, that's more than enough, especially when you go non-full screen. So I don't think that's a huge factor. And if I was using this at home, I actually probably would do that to avoid having another HDMI box or card in order to read that. On the top, we have our cold shoe mount so that you could put accessories. Presumably you could put your mic that you'd plug into the back. Sides very plain, bottom '20. On the front, we have our sensors and laser for the time of flight autofocus, which is a pretty cool feature for a camera like this. It uses basically a laser and the time it takes for that laser to come back to the camera in order to measure the depth, which would allow for really fast autofocus. YOLO claims 0.08 seconds of autofocus, although my guess is that measurement isn't including the whole process of it, and it also will depend on the lens, yes, because when you're using a camera with good autofocus, having the right lenses on that camera can make a huge difference. In fact, YOLO recommends just 2 lenses. They're 25 and 15 mil lenses, which should give you a lot of the room without having too much fisheyeing on the lenses, especially as it is a Micro Four Thirds camera, so there's a crop factor. So the 25 is about a 50 millimeter, which is good for portraits. And that'll be great for a face cam, but actually would kind of get a little tight when you really think about it. I'm thinking about it. Just like I'm thinking about how time of flight autofocus has the advantage of being really fast and really accurate, but it also has a limit in the distance it can measure. That's not a big deal for a camera like this that's not really designed to get big wide shots or moving subjects that are really, really far away. And so I think that's a pretty reasonable compromise and a smart design choice for its use case, which is have a damn good looking webcam, baby. And sensor size is a huge factor when it comes to having good image. Not only does it mean that each pixel will be larger, which allows for more light and better low light performance, it also gives you access to a whole suite of lenses that are designed to have a more cinematic look with depth of field, as well as just like versatility in how you can use it. And so I actually think this is a really, really cool use case for people that are predominantly tied to a computer and streaming all the time. One thing you'll notice that I haven't talked about is a screen. As opposed to most more versatile cameras, this doesn't have a screen because it's expecting you to be tied to a computer, which is predominantly a con. IMO. That seems like a really impractical way of doing it. Like, why not have this be self-sustaining? Although the trade-off could be the money they save on that computing internally could be put towards making a better image quality for the price, but that remains to be seen. Just like it remains to be seen if this thing actually can stream forever, like YOLO claims. They say because of the design and all aluminum body, it'll dissipate heat fast enough that you could presumably stream indefinitely, which is fantastic. I haven't had too much issue streaming from mirrorless or DSLR in terms of overheating, but I have had overheating issues mostly when I'm doing internal recording on Sony cameras a few generations ago. And it's very, very frustrating when you're in the middle of an interview and you're like, can you wait 20 minutes while I just wait here for my equipment to cool off? Thankfully, that won't be a problem with this. You just press the button, take the lens cap off. Look at that giant freaking sensor. Okay, it's not giant compared to like full frame cameras, but compared to webcams, bro, this thing's like 4 times bigger. It's crazy. This sensor is a Sony IMX sensor. There's not a ton of technical details. What we do know is that it's good for 4K 60 across the whole sensor and has dual native ISO, although we don't know specifically which ISOs they're talking about, but can range from 100 ISO to 9600 ISO. So that's a pretty dang good range, although I'm curious to see how grainy it gets at 9600. You know what I'm saying, dog? I'm saying you should check out our sponsor, Saily. When you're traveling, it is important to stay connected with your loved ones back home and on the road. Saily is an easy to use eSIM that you only need to download once, and your phone is up and running in over 200 locations. It is a lot more affordable than getting dinged with roaming charges, and there's no need to wait in line at a sketchy kiosk at an airport or a vending machine. I don't want to buy a SIM from a vending machine. Plus, they offer regional plans if you're going to be bouncing around from country to country. They offer 24/7 support and will give you a full refund if for whatever reason it does not work with your device. Get an exclusive 15% discount on Saily data plans. Use code ShortCircuit at checkout and download Saily app or go to saily.com/shortcircuit. We've got our YOLO S7 set up on a C-stand. That's probably not what you're gonna wanna do. You're gonna wanna get some kind of mount for behind your monitor or to an arm. Thankfully, the quarter 20 means that it's gonna be fairly easy. The other thing to note is that as a safety feature, the sensor's not supposed to activate without a lens. And that's a good thing because if you have your lens off and the sensor on, the electrostatic can actually draw dust to it and damage the sensor. So that's a nice little nifty little safety feature. You know what I'm saying? I do have to say, this looks pretty good. It has the benefit of that proper, not quite cine lens. So you get like cool depth of field effect, like you can see Glenn in the back is out of focus. It's doing a pretty good job tracking me. This isn't the recommended lens, but in terms of if I was streaming, that's really not bad. So let's see what we got for controls. And I will say that even though the camera is really shaking on the tripod, you can see in this camera, the actual video feed is not too bad. Like it's obviously a little bit jittery, but that's not that bad. There's gotta be some kind of stabilization, or maybe I'm just losing my mind. In our camera adjustment panels, we got our video settings. We can go from landscape to portrait. If I was using this at home, I would be using it in landscape. Gosh, wow. I can say if I'm only comparing to webcams, this is the best looking webcam I've ever seen. If we're comparing to cameras that are the same price as it, that remains to be seen. And then we have our HDMI resolution. We're actually limited to 1080p through the USB-C. That's plenty for our purposes today, but it's nice to know that you could do 4K through the camera, especially if you're making YouTube videos. For streaming, I don't think that 4K is as important. Next, we have our imaging settings. That's a really subtle change in our white balance. I prefer the cool colors, although I think they got their naming schemes backward because this cool colors one's actually tending warmer to adjust for colder lights. So I think I look better at that. You can adjust your sharpness to really cook those pores, or really soft, which almost looks a little bit out of focus, but not too bad. We have contrast. We can cook it or uncook it. We can adjust our saturation. I can say something sad. People ask how you're doing, and you have to say you're fine, but you're not really fine. Deep down inside, you're hurting. Wow, that felt really real. We have our distortion correction, which will adjust for fisheye, although we don't need that because we're using a 25mm lens. So you can see I'm actually fairly far away, like this is now me a centimeter away from touching. This works if you can get the camera behind the monitor. It's a little bit close for what I'd be doing in our purposes today. Then we got vignetting correction, which is not as much of a problem I've found on Micro Four Thirds. It's usually when you're using zoom lenses on bigger sensors, but it's possible that there's lenses that would vignette. So
It'll just basically adjust the edges of the frame to not get darker. Next up, we have our focus. So first we can adjust our channel, which should reduce the signal interference between cameras. I don't do a ton of multicam auto focus stuff, so I've never experienced that before, but you can change it so there won't be any interference. And then you have your continuous autofocus, your single autofocus, or your face. So face seems to have some kind of just like face tracking. I imagine for most people, they'll want that. And we can change the focus speed because although technically you want the fastest tracking, sometimes it looks unnatural to have like a robot autofocus when it's too fast. And there's something like a cinematic quality that people actually enjoy more when there's a little bit of a slow rack. And so I'm actually gonna go standard on my focus speed. Next, we got our zoom. I wonder what that does. No. We have our hotkeys, so we can set different levels of zoom to different keys. But seeing as that we're already at the maximum zoom I'd want to be, we are not going to need that. Next, we have our AI parameter. Why are they calling this an AI feature? This is just controlling a basic feature of the camera. That's stupid. Don't call it f***ing AI, man. It's just controlling your aperture. We can set the amount of AI blurring they do, as well as like the aperture settings in that menu. So it wants me to stay still. Select your preferred image brightness. This one's a little bit different. Why did it do this weird color thing? This looks terrible. It looks so much worse than it did before. Your AI gets a big thumbs down on top of the regular AI thumbs down from me. We are going to reset. So much better. Also, I want to have manual control over all my stuff. You might want to go to the audio, and it actually seems like it's done a pretty good job getting my skin tones about where I would want them. But I much prefer having my controls all manual. They have two different settings here that do the same thing, but with a different name. So if you don't know, the wider you have your aperture in a lens, the more blurred things are gonna look when they're out of focus. If you have a small little aperture, there's more depth of your scene that will be in
out of focus.
If you close your aperture by going to the higher numbers, you will not only get a darker image because less light is going through the smaller hole, but more of your scene will be in focus. Seeing as we're having a good time at f1.8, that's great. Or you can use their drop down for blur, low, medium, high, which basically closes your aperture and makes things dark. I feel like that's fine, but that should be in the auto side of the settings, not the manual side. So we're just gonna leave that there. Next we have our ISO settings. I imagine that it's 400 or 800, so we'll go to 400. Either of them looks pretty good, like not particularly grainy. The image quality, it looks like I've got a pretty good dynamic range, so I think 400 is plenty. Next we have our shutter speed, and I actually think that they're not right about this shutter speed because this is 60 FPS, and generally when you're doing camera stuff, you have your shutter speed at 1 over twice your frame rate, so that the shutter is open half of the frame. That's the most cinematic look, but it wouldn't look quite right if you're shooting 1/60th with a 60 FPS frame rate. It would look a little bit soft, and I don't think that's quite right, so I actually think they're lying to me. But this does sort of have that 30 FPS look, even though it's presumably actually at 60 FPS, so that's fine. And if I'm doing Twitch streaming, I'm gonna be at 60 FPS anyway. Next, we have our white balance, which is great. The auto stuff did a pretty darn good job. We got our Greenland look, and we have our Mexico look. And then we have a blue and red offset, or you can pick a specific color. I actually thought the auto white balance did a pretty good job, so I'm just gonna leave that on auto. Although, if I was setting up for a long-term stream, I probably would find the right setting so that I don't have to worry about it midstream kind of shifting if I have weird color things that happen. We actually have access to more color correcting, so you can take a capture image and then color correct that and kind of set that as a preset. We don't need to do that. This looks good as it is. And then a live scene button. It put everything back on auto, which actually is a good thing for me to point out. In the exposure setting on auto, you can actually have an anti-flicker setting, so for 50 or 60 hertz, depending on where you are in the world. And then you can kind of have a lot of the same settings. Like you can set your aperture here, but then you can also set sort of your amount of expected light to compensate for. Again, I'm gonna just go back to manual. That looks really good. And like, not only does it not have a face light to help light my face, it's actually working against all this purple bounce. And I have to say, it's doing a pretty admirable job at making my skin not look totally wacky. Like when I'm looking at it, it looks a little bit off, but if I was streaming with this, I don't think anyone would comment. It would look totally acceptable, super sharp. The autofocus is pretty good. It really wants to do my hand. You can kind of see it in jumps. You can see when I do this, it goes like da 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 da. But I gotta say that autofocus is working pretty good at tracking me. It takes a little bit to make sure that it's got me, but Usually when you're streaming, you're not running around your room too much, and if you are, I would just crank the brightness in your room and then close your aperture a little bit, and you're probably gonna be covered anyway. I'm now gonna record the camera feed directly into OBS so that we can get a better idea of what it'll look like in your recording software. There is a little bit more jitteriness on my monitor. So I had to close the app in order to get the feed because, like most video devices, you can only be outputting to one of them at a time, which is a really annoying distinction. I don't know if that's a Windows or an OBS thing, but freaking figure it out. But you can imagine if I'm just a tiny little person in the window, that's about as nice as I've seen for a streaming camera. And people use much more expensive cameras than this for streaming, but here's the flip side. This thing is only a webcam. And that could be great. You might be someone that's like, I just want the best video quality when I'm streaming on my computer. I don't want to worry about it. I'm never taking my camera away. But at the price of $800, which is its sale price, but it's one of those sales that goes on forever, so that's really just the real price. They just want to pretend like you're saving $100. You can get a pretty damn good camera. The Sony has the ZV-E10, the Mark I. If you buy used, you can get like $400, $500, $800 new. The Mark II is even better for video, but it's a little bit more. If you don't like Sony, Canon has the R50, Nikon has the Z30 that are kind of similar price brackets, and I think are much more versatile. However, I don't think that their video out is substantially nicer than this. And so if you are going to just use that as a webcam, this isn't a bad alternative. And it is really good. It was really easy. If you're someone that knows nothing about cameras, the auto settings did a pretty good job. Not the AI settings, those suck. But $800 without a lens is a lot of money for a webcam. And if you're starting out in content creation, here's a little bit of a tip. Video quality matters up to a certain point. And when you kind of get past that point, there's a huge drop off of diminishing returns. For way less than half the price of this thing, especially if you're adding a lens, you can get a pretty damn good webcam that captures you. And that's what matters when you're streaming, is you, not the camera, not the gear. Are you fun? Are you engaging? Are you confident? Are you exciting? That's so much more important. So if I were you, instead of spending $800 on this, if you're getting started out, I'd buy like something pretty good at $200 and then treat yourself to like a massage for $600 and just like enjoy yourself, come back to your stream super recharged, super energized, and like, that's a way better stream, IMO. Just like this outro is better than the one I did yesterday, because I didn't do one yesterday. This is the first short circuit I've done this week. And if you're still interested in a camera in this price range for streaming, we actually unboxed the ZV-10 when that came out a couple years ago, and so you should watch that one. I have a lot of thoughts back then, and I don't think they've changed that much since then.